Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give a couple minutes for those who are still getting onto our webinar, and then we will be ready to start. Good afternoon. My name is Dana Herman Hart, and I am the Director of Legal Services and the Pause for Empowerment program at Crisis Center North in Pittsburgh, PA. I want to welcome you all to Safer Together, Cross-Reporting for Humane and Human Services, a deep dive into child and animal abuse. This is a second series virtual workshop hosted by the Richard K. Mellon Foundation and Crisis Center North. We are going to talk about the continuing credits and give you some information, and then we will introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Dana. My name is Paige Buck, and I am with the MSW program at Westchester University. And for anyone who is listening today who would like CEU credit for this, we will do that at the end. So stay through the whole presentation, and there will be a Qualtrics link that is put in the chat. And all you have to do is include your name and email and information about your license, and we will get that out to you free within the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. I would like to introduce you to Nancy Blaney, the Director of Government Affairs at the Animal Welfare Institute based in Washington, D.C.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this really terrific webinar. I'm very much looking forward to it myself. I want to introduce my colleague, Claire Coughlin, who came to AWI originally as our coordinator for our Animals and Interpersonal Violence program and has since risen to a new job also as the director of our new companion animal program. So we're really excited about expanding our jurisdiction there. You have her bio, but I do think it's worth mentioning Claire has a master's in human development and family studies, extensive experience in both social services and animal advocacy, and most crucially for what you are about to hear today, for over a decade, she specialized in evidence-based education and support services for children and families impacted by abuse and neglect. So I am going to turn it over to Claire to get to her presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you to the Keystone Link Coalition for having me today. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm really pleased to see that we have so many participants as well. Please, as we're going through, feel free, if there are questions you have for me, to go ahead and put those in the Q&A section or chat, and we'll see if we can get to some of those at the end of this. But as Nancy said, I am with the Animal Welfare Institute, and I am specifically focused on animals and interpersonal violence, and now the new companion animal department. And so today, while we are here to talk about animal cruelty and child abuse, I will start with just a little bit of a some general information about the link between interpersonal violence and animal cruelty. I'm not going to spend much time on that, as I know many of you here today have participated in other Keystone Link Coalition webinars and are probably familiar. But before we do our deep dive into the child abuse angle, I did want to cover just a few of kind of the main points that we have here around interpersonal violence and animal cruelty. So with the addition of some recent studies, research is showing that up to almost 90% of domestic violence survivors have reported that their pets have either been threatened, harmed, or potentially killed by their abusers, and that up to half of them have reported delaying leaving a dangerous situation, specifically out of concern for their pet's safety. There's one study that I mentioned here that compared the reports of women in domestic violence shelters to those of their non-abuse counterparts. And the women in shelters were 11 times more likely to report that a partner had harmed or killed a pet. And then they were also, I think, four times more likely to report that an abusive partner had threatened a pet. There's a more recent study that I don't have up here, but that was of mother-child dyads seeking domestic violence services. And that study showed that over half of those women reported that their abusive partners had also harmed, threatened, or even killed an animal as well. And then the final point that I have here is just that not only do we have research and studies demonstrating this link in general, but we do have studies that have shown that there is also a severity link between the severity of domestic violence that is experienced in a household and the severity of pet abuse within that household as well. Okay. So often when we talk about interpersonal violence, we are thinking about violence between partners. When you say domestic violence, that is where the mind often goes. But what we do know is that when there's violence in a home, it is very frequently directed not only towards one person or a partner, but also towards other individuals, children, and animals in the home. You know, we know that we are talking largely about highly volatile households in general. When it comes to pet ownership, the most recent stats, I think it's 66% of US families report having pets in the home. And interestingly enough, there is research that has shown that that number actually increases when we are talking about homes where there is family violence present. That could be for any number of reasons, but some studies have shown that in these cases, animals are actually given as gifts by perpetrators so that they then abuse and kill those animals in an effort to control their victims. And then even when violence is not directed towards a specific adult or a child in a home, they may also be forced to certainly witness and even participate in that abuse. For instance, they might not be allowed to feed a pet or could be coerced into physically harming an animal by their abuser. Okay, there we go. We know that witnessing animal abuse can constitute child abuse in and of itself. But research also suggests that not only are other forms of child abuse more likely to occur in homes where pet abuse is present, but that there could also be links to, as you see here, this is from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, but that there could also be links to the number of abusive incidents that children are experiencing in these homes where pets are also being abused. Studies have consistently found that child maltreatment frequently overlaps with animal abuse. This one study showed that pet abuse was present in 88% of homes where physical assault of a child was reported. And in that same study, 60% of children who witnessed or perpetrated animal cruelty also reported that they had experienced either child abuse or domestic violence in their homes. And then these children were also more likely to abuse animals themselves as well. Okay, so for those of you, I know we do have a lot of human services professionals who are registered for the webinar today, but for those of you on the webinar who are not human services personnel, I did want to touch just a little bit on specific signs of child abuse. So this list it's not meant to be exhaustive, but rather focuses on signs that someone outside of human services might encounter or hear reports of in the course of their typical work. So maybe something that an animal welfare professional who's not trained in child abuse and neglect could encounter or hear reports of in the course of their work. So for physical abuse, some of these are probably fairly obvious, but bruising, redness, signs of restraint or lacerations, untreated or unexplained injuries, certainly hidden injuries can be a sign, as well as injuries to both sides of the body. And that is specifically because typically accidents are more likely to be one-sided. Humans, when we have an accident, when we fall and we break a bone, as I recently did, we very rarely fall and have, bruising or breaks on both sides of our bodies. Typically, when we fall and we have an accident, we're going to have a one-sided injury. So that is certainly a sign to be aware of. And then other things like recoiling from touch, reports of sudden behavior changes, or changes that are noticeable when a caregiver comes into a room or when a specific individual comes into a room, if a child shuts down or withdraws in that particular person's presence. And then, of course, abusive animals may also be a sign of abuse that they've experienced themselves, and whether that's an observed behavior that they're repeating, or potentially a reenactment of trauma that they've experienced themselves. And so some of these physical abuse signs may also be signs of sexual abuse as well. But in addition to that, some of these other signs may be bedwetting, nightmares, difficulty or pain when sitting, walking, and then inappropriate sexual behaviors. And that will include or can include inappropriate sexual behaviors with household pets or even with other animals. For neglect, often what we're talking about is signs of poor hygiene, things like body odor, soiled clothing, matted hair, signs of malnutrition or dehydration. Do they have a hallowed appearance, a grayed appearance? Are you noticing ribs sticking out? Things along those lines. Perhaps signs of confusion, dizziness, fatigue. All of those can be signs of either malnutrition and or dehydration. And then in general, unmet basic needs. So are you going into a house in, the winter and it's snowing out and there's no heat? So utilities aren't on, maybe there's no sign of food in a household, or you're seeing signs of untreated injuries, things where maybe medical attention or medication is not in good supply. And then often things like whether inappropriate clothing could be a sign as well of neglect or unmet need in general. When it comes to emotional or psychological abuse, reports of sudden emotional outbursts, lack of empathy, and this, of course, can include lack of empathy when it comes to their interactions with animals. And then age inappropriate behaviors. What I mean by that is going to be parentification. Are we seeing young children in a home who are taking on the role of a caregiver or taking on the role of a parent? Something that seems highly inappropriate given their age. And then reports of either suicidal thoughts or behaviors, and potentially withdrawal or isolation. Of course, as I said at the beginning, this is not an exhaustive list, but just meant to give kind of a glimpse at some of the more typical signs of child abuse and neglect that might be encountered. Too often, human services personnel, and that has at times, of course, included myself, don't consider the bond between people and their pets, but more often, abusers do consider this bond. Abusers can use that bond, they manipulate it and use it in their favor, then they will harm or threaten or even kill a pet, whether that's of a partner or of a child, and they'll do that in order to intimidate and control them. So you do see here a few from a 2015 study, I believe it was, a few quotes. Every time when he gets mad, he says that he bought it, which is referring to a mouse, and that he pays for everything and he's going to cook and eat it if we don't listen. So again, using those threats of harm to a pet, and in this case, to a pet that was bought by an abuser, in order to control the other family members. Okay, a little bit more about children and their pets. Pets for children, like with most of us, I would say all, but it's not all, but most of us are considered family members, and they provide, especially for young children, a tremendous amount of comfort and support. There's one study, I believe it's of 5-year-olds, that showed that almost half of 5-year-olds, when asked, who they can confide in, identify their pets as their confidants. Just as with adults, pets can help decrease stress and improve overall health for children. And the bonds that they have with pets can be even more important for children if they're living in highly volatile environments where they are not only providing that comfort or that source of emotional support, but they're also potentially serving, as an attachment figure and as a source of security for a child in a home that is otherwise highly volatile. And then one of the other things I note here, and I think is an important part, is that some children might even be more likely to disclose abuse either to an animal directly. They may be willing to be, again, because they can confide in their pets, may disclose abuse or discuss abuse with a pet, or be more likely to disclose it in the presence of a pet because they do offer that sense of support and that sense of calm and comfort for them. So knowing what we do about the overlap between child and animal abuse in these violent households, it's important that human services professionals ask children questions about their experiences with pets and with pet abuse. So by asking some of these questions about animals in the home, family violence can potentially be identified earlier, and that would make interventions more likely to succeed and much more likely to actually safeguard children and pets in the household. So what I want to do is take a look at, this is a tool, a professional tool developed by our team at AWI, and that's something that if you have not already, I know that all participants will and should receive this handout. But I do want to go through some of the key points when it comes to talking to children about animals in their home and about their experience with animal abuse. Here we go. So I'm just going to go over a few of kind of the simple questions that can be asked regarding their experiences with animals. And often these are questions that might provide insight not only into the experience of a pet, but into the treatment of a child as well. Because some of these are designed to prompt a child to potentially disclose violent behavior, whether that is towards a pet or potentially towards themselves as well. So you'll see a few of these questions here. Have you or your family ever had pets? Do you have them now? Have you ever lost a pet that you've really cared about? And if so, what happened? Has your pet ever been hurt? Do you ever feel worried about them or worried about bad things happening to them? And has anybody ever tried to make you do something that you didn't want to do by threatening or hurting your pets? And again, you guys will all receive this questionnaire as well. Okay. There we go. Additional questions could include, have you ever seen someone hurt an animal or a pet? Have you ever hurt an animal or a pet? Have you ever been frightened or hurt by an animal or a pet? And then what happens when your pet misbehaves in your household? And these last two here, these questions are meant to kind of draw parallels between a child's experience and those of their pet. And it's something that can, again, we can learn a lot from drawing parallels between a child's experience and that of an animal. And that could be for a number of reasons, but at least initially, children may be more willing and comfortable in discussing abuse of an animal than they are in discussing abuse of themselves. So have you ever been punished for something that your pet did, like getting into the trash or, tearing up the furniture? And then has your pet ever been punished for something you did, like not doing your chores, not doing the dishes, not taking out the trash like you were supposed to? And again, by drawing these parallels, we can often learn a lot. And while there are many reasons, one can be that perpetrators, and for those of you on this call today who are familiar with kind of the dynamic of child abuse, perpetrators do frequently threaten against disclosure of child abuse. They will threaten a child, if you tell someone, if you tell someone I did this, I am going to kill you. If you tell someone I physically abused you, I'm going to harm your mother. But they don't frequently explicitly threaten against disclosures of pet abuse. So especially for young children, if they've been threatened not to discuss their own abuse, but have not necessarily been explicitly threatened not to disclose the abuse of a pet, they may be more likely to open up and discuss and disclose that pet abuse in a household than they are to discuss their own. So now we're going to touch a little bit more on specifically children who witness pet abuse. These kids are at a greater risk for becoming either victims themselves of abuse or potentially perpetrators. And one form of abuse that they are too frequently exposed to is going to be pets in violent family situations. Again, a few quotes here from that same 2015 study I referenced earlier. She had seen her dog kicked, beaten, and choked many, many times. He chokes him with a leash. He's held him up high with the leash so he can't breathe. And not surprisingly, for children who are exposed to pet abuse, they overwhelmingly report that this exposure causes significant distress. Okay, so here is similar to the last tool we discussed and something you'll also receive, but a professional tool that's been developed for when a child has witnessed animal abuse, or whether that is known or whether it is suspected. This is a guide for human services professionals in discussing that abuse with a child and kind of assessing potential need for intervention. So when there's knowledge that a child has witnessed animal abuse or reason to believe that, the following information can be obtained, either from a child or potentially from their caregiver, depending on the circumstances. And they're intended to ascertain the impact of witnessing, but also potential for other violent behavior in the home, particularly towards that child in question. So what is a few of these things? What is the relationship to the abuser, the relationship to the animal, and what was their role in witnessing it, and what type of abuse was witnessed? How severe was it? What was their response? Are they fearful of reprisal? And did they speak about the abuse to anyone? And if so, this is an important point. If so, how was that met? If they made a disclosure or spoke of the abuse to someone else, what kind of response did they get from that individual? Was it something that provided them with support and assistance, or potentially something that fed that fear of reprisal? All right, and then part of this same tool for when children witness abuse is some guidance for assessing a child's emotional response to being a witness. So looking at signs and symptoms they may be displaying. Are they reporting nightmares? Are they giving off signs of anxiety, having difficulty sleeping, changes in behavior or eating patterns, things along those lines? Trouble concentrating can certainly be a sign. And then this is important, repetitive play or themes or aspects of trauma. So again, potentially reenacting trauma that they have experienced or witnessed. And then are they reporting feelings of guilt or shame? Or are they showing signs of detachment or just a numbness, a change in affect, things like that, that it should prompt you to be concerned. So children who witness this violence should be evaluated by a mental health professional and have a treatment plan developed. Most trained mental health professionals, including, I would imagine, many that are here today, should have the necessary skills and training to do this. But it's really important to note that they need to be aware of the importance of directly asking questions about witnessing or engaging in animal abuse in order to really get at some of these symptoms and to develop a treatment plan that's appropriate for a child. This study here examined the relationship between animal maltreatment, exposure, and patterns of social emotional adjustment. And this was with children who were involved with community-based domestic violence agencies. And you can see here they found that when compared to children who were not exposed to animal maltreatment, those who were exposed, let's see, they were 3.26 more times likely to have moderately compromised patterns of social emotional functioning, and they were nearly 6 times more likely to have severely compromised patterns of adjustment. These findings, like those that I talked about earlier, that indicate witnesses are also more likely to perpetrate animal abuse. They're consistent with studies of violent, antisocial adults who have a history of animal abuse as children. And although these relationships are real and important to recognize, I do urge people not to make assumptions necessarily when children abuse animals. Unfortunately, we do see too many people jump to conclusions when a child displays these behaviors. They assume conduct or antisocial personality disorders. And when we make those assumptions, we are doing children a disservice. Sometimes they are kind of written off as beyond significant help, and that's just far from true. Of course, it can be the case, but what we know is that there are many reasons that a child may display violence towards animals. It could be a matter of cognitive immaturity or delays, lack of proper education, and it could, as we discussed earlier, be a sign of their own abuse or exposure to domestic violence. And many times it may just be that behavior is minimalized or normalized in their households. And again, they're reenacting behaviors that they've observed. And yes, it absolutely can be a sign of antisocial behaviors or disorders. And again, severely compromised, as it's noted here, severely compromised patterns of adjustment. So all of that to say, there are just so many reasons and many factors why we may see these behaviors. So ultimately, what we do know for sure is that it is a sign that intervention is needed. And whether that is simply education, whether that is behavioral intervention, psychiatric intervention, or potentially legal interventions as well. So that same study of children who were exposed to animal maltreatment also found that the children, that those who were exposed to animal abuse were much, I'm so sorry. So sorry. I just read that incorrectly. So that those found that exposure to animal abuse might be even more traumatic for a child in a household that has family violence present. And I mentioned this before, so I thought I was repeating myself, but I did touch on this before. And that could be because in some of these really violent households, a pet might be the only secure attachment that a child has. It might be the healthiest relationship that a child has, and the most rewarding relationship that a child has. And so because of that, it can be that much more traumatic when they're exposed to animal abuse in the home. Watching harm to a pet can be terrorizing for a child, given the special role that a pet does play in providing emotional and social support for kids. Okay. So touching, of course, on the importance of cross-reporting, because we know that when violence is in the home, it frequently is directed not only to partners, but also to children and also to pets. And we know that we're looking at very violent households. If we identify any one type of abuse and report that abuse, we can alert to the risk of other violence in the home, and ideally interventions can be done sooner. So early, well-informed interventions then are going to be much more likely to succeed. When it comes to cross-reporting, I'm going to talk a little bit more about a few specifics, but first I did want to bring up an example from my own experience this week that is, again, I think just drives home the importance of cross-reporting specifically of cross-reporting child and animal abuse. I am involved in a child and animal abuse coalition, not terribly unlike the Keystone Coalition in my home state of Missouri. And it is something where in Missouri, we have not been able to yet get a cross-reporting law passed. But one of the things that we have done, as we are still attempting to do that, is developed some animal and child abuse coalitions. And it was maybe 2 days ago, this member of this coalition sent out a mass email to us. She works for a child protection center where they do forensic interviewing, but then also trauma-informed interventions, and just reached out to this group to say, hey, we have a kid who just came in and has been removed for child abuse. And he is terrified because of what could happen to his pit bull at home. He disclosed that he had witnessed his father abuse and kill, I think it was either 2 or 3 other family dogs already. And now that he had been removed from the home and he is in a position where he's potentially disclosing abuse, he was terrified that his father was going to kill the remaining family dog. So she, in an effort to try and help this child, she reached out to all of us and said, who do I contact? What do I do to get the dog out of this home today? And within 5 minutes, having a coalition of child and animal abuse professionals, within 5 minutes, there were responses from animal control, there were responses from child welfare individuals, there was a response from the prosecutor. And by the end of the day, the animal had been seized and was out of the home. They had warrants to search the house. They had, and even as they were waiting for the warrants, the animal control officers on our coalition, they went and they stood and they waited outside the house for hours, and so that they could save this dog and so that this child knew that the dog was safe. So that's a long story, but I just wanted to share it because it was this work at times, success may be few and far between, it feels. And it's hard work trying to get some of these cross-reporting laws passed and getting people trained, but seeing it in action and seeing it work so well and serve this child who, again, his only healthy relationship at this time was with his pet who was at risk, was really rewarding, and reminds me that a lot of this work is well worth doing. When it comes to cross-reporting and specifically reporting child abuse, here we go. There we go. Like with cross-reporting laws, the kind of procedures and requirements for reporting, they do vary far too much from one state to another, and even from one county or municipality to another, for me to kind of talk too specifically, because we are here because of the Keystone Link Coalition. I did put up Pennsylvania's child line there. But these are just some general tips for individuals who might be reporting child abuse, since I know we have many, many people here today who are from various states and even various countries, and certainly outside of Pennsylvania. So these are general tips that you might want to keep in mind when making a report of child abuse and neglect. Again, some of it is very basic information. Where do we find the child? What is their name, their general age range, alleged perpetrators, caregivers if they are not the same as the alleged perpetrators, the type of abuse or neglect, location or time of abuse if it's known, any witnesses if there are some, and any evidence if there is any. So, were videos taken, photographs? As a human service worker, did you receive that disclosure firsthand, or is it a secondhand account? A lot of these things do matter. And a lot of these things will differ from one place to another. So, yeah, again, an example from my own work, I have made many, many, many reports of child abuse and neglect in the state of Missouri, where we unfortunately have some of the highest rates of meth use and meth labs in the country. So if you call the Missouri Child Abuse Hotline, one of the first thing that is asked is, is a child at risk of immediate harm, immediate sexual abuse, or is the child in an active meth lab? And that's something that is very specific to our area, but that you do have to address every single time you make a report of child abuse and neglect, because it is so frequent. So this will vary significantly, but it is important also to note any other potential safety concerns. So again, in that case, an active meth lab, often they will ask, are there dogs or other animals that could be dangerous in a home that a first responder needs to be aware of? Are there weapons in the home? Is the alleged perpetrator in that home with the child? And are they, do they have a history of assault or weapons use, things like that? And then other reminders here just at the end, always keep a record of this report. That's whether you're a human service worker or you're an animal welfare worker, whether your employer requires you to or not, always keep a record. And that's, again, for your own professional safety, but also so that you can, you may be contacted for follow-up information, so that you have the ability to provide additional information, and so that you can follow up if necessary. So ask authorities when you can expect a response. Sometimes you may not get a response, and that is incredibly frustrating for many people. You may never know what happens to a report, but do always ask, if you can expect a response and when you can expect a response, so that you can follow up if need be, especially if it is a family that you're working with in a continuing capacity. All right, and so I know I'm about out of time, but I just wanted to finish with, this is one of my favorite quotes from James Herriot. I hope to make people realize how totally helpless animals are, how dependent on us and trusting, as a child must, that we will be kind and take care of their needs. So I think we have time for just a couple of quick questions if anybody has them. I'm sorry, I know I went through that quickly, but.
Yes, thank you, Claire. I'm so glad you mentioned about how children react to pets being left behind. I was going to ask a question about that myself. And I did have a question here in the chat. Let me just, someone was asking about how you would prioritize some of the interventions that you mentioned. Are there any that should be done before others?
Oh, wow. So that
Yes,
is
here we are. Out of the interventions listed, is there a go-to or preferred intervention that clinicians or child welfare professionals should use first?
That is a really good question and a little bit hard to answer. I hope whoever asked that will email me because I, with a little more context, can give a better answer. I would say it's like anything else. It's a matter of triaging. So really, is there going to be a behavioral intervention or education, or do we need to look at our is the pet abuse the most risky thing right now, or is the suicidal ideation or suicidal behaviors, are those the things that need to be addressed before you can even attempt to address some of these other issues? So like anything else, it's looking at the symptoms as a whole and deciding which intervention is appropriate first. The other piece that is important to consider is age range, because most often that education and some of those early behavioral interventions are going to be more appropriate for those maybe 6 and under, when there's the potential that they really just don't know yet that this is inappropriate behavior or haven't been taught how to interact with animals with empathy. Whereas an older child, it's not going to be as developmentally appropriate and therefore might escalate the need for additional interventions. And again, depending on the behavior with an animal, an inappropriate sexual behavior, things like that may, especially with older children, call for some very specific, and there are some very specific evidence-based interventions that address those kind of sexual behaviors that a child might be displaying. Sorry, that's a hard one to answer. Please reach out if you want more specifics.
Well, thanks, Claire. And I know that you have to pop off and have another meeting just sneaking up behind you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And I now have the pleasure of introducing Nikki Thompson, who happens to be in the area where I spent my childhood, so it's always exciting. Nikki is a Chief Humane Society police officer for the Bucks County SPCA. And something I didn't know until now, but she is a second-generation animal control officer, having followed in her father's footsteps. So that's very exciting. Nikki has investigated thousands of animal cruelty cases, participated in many successful animal cruelty prosecutions, helped thousands of animals get a new start in life, and has educated law enforcement and first responders in safe animal handling practices. And I know she's got a great program, a cooperative program to talk to us about today. So Nikki, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. Wanted to thank everybody for taking this lovely Wednesday afternoon and being here with us all. And thank all the members of the Keystone Link Coalition who were here and have arranged this and helped with all this. I've been peeking at some of the chat and I saw that there's quite a bit of social workers and children and youth members from Bucks County on this. So I'm really glad to see that, and hopefully we'll cross paths at some point soon. So as Nancy introduced me, my name is Nikki Thompson. I've been a humane officer with the SPCA in Bucks County for the past, oh geez, I hate to admit it, nearly 19 years now. Prior to that, I was an animal control officer. And I was raised in a family that did animal control. So I thought it was normal that you go with your dad in the middle of the night to pick up an animal and take it to the shelter. I've now realized that that's probably not everybody's experience, but, and I did not think this was the area I wanted to go into. This kind of fell into my lap, and I've been in love with this career ever since. All of my contact information is here. Should you guys ever need it, whether you're in Bucks County or not, please feel free to reach out. I can always hook you up with anybody in Pennsylvania that's able to assist you. So keep a hold of that number and that email, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to kind of talk about the same things that Claire did. However, I'm going to be from the animal side, and animals don't talk to you as much. They tell you a lot of things by what they do, by what they say, by how they act. But they're not going to be able to come out and say, hey, he's hitting me, or hey, I'm not being fed enough. So we have to pay attention to a lot more of their physical signs. One of my favorite quotes is, what you aim at determines what you see. Well, my aim and what I've been taught to aim at is that having law enforcement and social work and all of the other child welfare or even adult protective service types agencies work together for the benefit of animals and families really comes out and does a lot for the community. Animals and children are one of the most vulnerable subsets of our society. And often when one is being neglected or abused, the other is suffering with the same kind of treatment. Animal law enforcement agencies and social service agencies are not always in contact with each other. And often they don't understand the signs of abuse or neglect of the side that they don't regularly work with. And we'll go into some of those signs as we go on with this presentation. The goal here is to give you the basic tools to recognize the signs of abuse and neglect in animals, who to call, and how to develop relationships prior to having a situation that requires assistance, and tools to obtain assistance to keep parents, children, pets, families together in the long run, because that's probably our ultimate goal. I'm going to start off with a quick little story. This is a great story. It has a decent ending, so but it really just kind of highlights the kind of work that happens when you work together as a team, when you have everybody all on the same page. In Bucks County, we're really fortunate that we have co-responders who work beside local police and law enforcement. And this way, when they have different kinds of situations that arise, they're able to handle it, not from a law enforcement perspective, but more from a social work perspective, and how can we provide assistance rather than prosecution. And they have a vast array of resources that really help our community members when we get into these situations. And having a co-responder is actually how I became involved in this case. Back last summer, the animal control officer, now there's a little difference between animal control and humane officers in Pennsylvania, because we have to have 7 different kinds of officers. Actually, I think it's only 4. To enforce animal laws. Animal control tends to work with police departments. They do things like running at large, licenses, rabies, vaccines, things like that. Humane officers work through local shelters or humane organizations, and what they do is enforce this itty bitty teeny section of the law called the animal cruelty codes. So we often work together when there's a situation that arises. The animal control officer in this township was called to let them know that there were numbers of dogs that would come running loose out of this house. And they were terrorizing the neighborhood. So she went out to look at the situation, and just being able to look in the window, immediately she saw that there's a problem. Now she knew there were children in this house. So the first thing she did was call the co-responder for that township. The co-responder did arrive, and I was called in to handle the cruelty end of this investigation, cruelty and neglect. There were multiple children in the home. I think there were about 6, and there were a large number of dogs. The front of the home was filled with trash. The front window, you could see feces and dogs in that window. Now, of course, this photograph is showing you a couple of weeks later when they had gotten a dumpster and cleaned up a bit. But I was able to actually gain the trust of the defendant, and go in to assess the situation. They were more afraid of their children being taken away than they were of the animals being taken away. Now, how they did not think that we would all work together on this, I'm not quite sure. But in any case, it made a great situation that they trusted me enough to go in and look at everything. So we went into the house, and this is the first room that we found. Now, of course, the first thing I'm told is that it just got this way. This just happened. I'm sure you've all been told this, and I'm sure that you all believed it as well. This didn't just happen. This didn't happen yesterday. Your house wasn't clean yesterday or the day before. However, we did have 12 dogs in this house. That could be part of the reason why it looks like this. You notice in this picture, there's a large bag of dog food. It's unopened. However, they did have some dog food in a bowl. They did have some fresh water, which I believe that they put in there before we went into the house. The kitchen was full of moldy dishes. There was feces everywhere and urine everywhere. A lot of those paper towels that you see back in the kitchen were soaked with urine. So then we went through the kitchen and walked around to the living room where there was a puppy pen set up, an exercise pen. There were 5 puppies that were being kept inside of that pen. They were all about 6 to 8 weeks old. We didn't have a definite time frame on when they were born, but in that age range. And this is the living room. So this is just looking to the right of that last picture where we were at. A lot of the black stuff you see is feces on the ground. Apparently the dogs had a field day over the past 24 hours, if we're to believe the defendant. I did not go any further into this house. The biggest thing here was the odor, the feces. I mean, you could just smell that there was something really wrong going on here. And since I have been determined as an expert in feces, I'm going to say that these have been here for a while, and that, you know, it really saddens me to see a child's toys laying next to a pile of feces like that. That tells me there's a lot more going on there than, you know, just taking the animals out of the situation. I'm not keeping up on my notes here, so forgive me for 1 second. So we had a lot of dogs here with no names. Like a child that doesn't have a name or isn't called by a name, this would be completely awful. Even at the shelter level, we name all of our animals because we don't want to call them 32649. You know, we want to make sure that they have an identity and that they are a sentient creature that has a name. In this house were 7 adult dogs and 5 puppies. 8 of the youngest dogs did not have names. That was according to the mother. Of course, talking to the children, we got a different answer to that, where those and the children had named the pets. However, the mother refused to call them by any names. The children in the home ranged from 3.5 to 23, and I believe some of the oldest children were off serving in the military and not at home at the time of this. There was one puppy that was extremely lethargic. He was much smaller than the other puppies. And we did try to take him to a veterinarian. However, he unfortunately did pass due to his failure to thrive. Most of the dogs here had never seen a veterinarian. They had never been socialized. And socialization is really key with dogs, especially at a young age. Up to that 8 to 10 week mark is the key time to socialize an animal. And that's when they become, you know, if they have the want and the innate ability to become a great pet and to really like people, that's the time frame when it's developed the most. What we found out had happened here is that the parents had brought home 2 dogs that they found running loose in Philadelphia. They were found as strays and never neutered. And this is back about 2018 or 19. What happens when you don't have neutered animals? Everybody gets involved and you end up with puppies or kittens. In this case, dogs, so we have puppies. During COVID, they were able to sell the puppies online very easily. If everybody wanted a dog or a cat during COVID because they were home, so it was much easier. Even in the sheltering industry, we have found that after COVID, animals aren't adopted quite as quickly. So this was really making a much more difficult time for the owners to get rid of their extra dogs that they had. Now they're up to 7 dogs of breeding age, which can lead to quite a bit of issues if you have that many in one shot. Now, a lot of these dogs had behavior problems, including aggression towards people, and were greatly under-socialized. A lot of times you'll hear people say, you know, oh, they must have been abused because they don't want to talk to people, or they don't want anybody to pet them or touch them, or they shy away. A lot of time it's not necessarily abuse, it's under-socialization with dogs. So the outcome here was a decent outcome, like I said in the beginning. All but 2 of the original dogs were surrendered. The original female was spayed, so we had that train shut off where we did not have any more puppies coming out of that situation. The 5 adult dogs and 5 puppies were surrendered to the shelter. Children and youth, along with the co-responder, they continued to monitor the cleaning of the house and the life of the children. All of the evidence, photographs, documentation, we shared them between the agencies. And that was important because, you know, like I said, they didn't trust anybody else to go into the house. So it really gave us the opportunity to make sure that everything was documented between the agencies. We did file a summary citation in this case. Now that's pretty much like a traffic ticket. The owner was found guilty and given a nominal fine. I mean, I think it was maybe $100 plus court costs. It was more to document this because this is not the first type of situation that she's gotten in trouble for. Usually a first offense, most of us will look at it and say, well, we'll help you out this time, and then next time, you know, we'll go from there. But she has had other issues going on for quite some time. The best part of this is 4 adult dogs and 4 of the puppies were given names, provided with training, neutering, vaccinations, and adopted into new homes. Like I had said, the 1 puppy had failure to thrive and died shortly after arrival. 1 of the dogs was euthanized due to aggressive behaviors, even though we tried everything possible to rehabilitate him. The original male dog had extreme aggression issues, which was also another part of our consideration. And why do we leave him there? Or do we leave him there, or do we take him to a shelter where his outcome may not be as good? His aggression issues were fine with his people, but strangers and other situations would have really tossed him into a downward spiral. So no, we've had no complaints of the dogs running since then, and everything seems to be going well. Our takeaways from this case is that each participant had their own particular skill and expertise to bring to the case. The animals and the children were all helped appropriately. Some of the child and animal bonds were kept intact, and I think that Carolyn spoke with that during the last presentation, despite having to remove some of the animals. And it did make the children sad that we had to take some of the dogs away. However, the majority of them, the children understood that they were going to new homes and that things would be much better for them and for the animals. There's still monitoring of the situation as far as I understand. The home is in much better condition. It's actually not too far from where I live, so I drive past it quite frequently. And I'm not seeing the mess that was out there quite as much. And again, she was charged with a minimal fine. And in Pennsylvania, humane officers are not mandated reporters. In my organization, I have made it so that any of the officers in our humane law enforcement department must report any and all situations that involve founded animal neglect or cruelty that also involve children. So that is our organizational. Now, we don't have that. We are not mandated to report that. I always feel it's better to report things than to not report them, because you never know what's going to happen. Now, there was a case that was not reported. There were many animals inside the home. There were seven children living in a home that were being homeschooled. And the conditions in that home were pretty bad. After it was reported to us a month after the children were removed, our organization went and responded. When asked why it wasn't cross-reported, even though I know there is no mandated reporting for animal cruelty in Pennsylvania. The police officer in that case said, "I'd rather not add insult to injury," because they removed the children. They didn't want to have the animals removed either. I felt that was one of the biggest disservices that officer could have done in a case. And I'll explain to you why. So children and their pets are often a great source of comfort to each other. When at all possible, many organizations or humane law enforcement agencies will try to keep a family whole and provide assistance rather than to remove an animal. In some cases, there have been animals that have gone to live in foster care with a child. This is the rarest of situations, but it's one of the most touching and successful cases in the terms of the child and their outcomes. So in that case, which was fairly recent, it has not resolved yet. The animals were removed about 30 days after the children were removed. What happened was, after fighting with the parents for a number of months, 3 to 4 months, I believe, to try to get them to surrender the animals so they did not have to live inside of a shelter, we finally were able to get that surrender, and they agreed to it. Now, upon the surrender, family had taken in the children, and they had offered to take in a couple of the dogs as well, to be with the children, because these were the children's dogs. We went to do a home visit. We drove for a number of hours, myself and another colleague of mine, to make sure that the home was appropriate, that the environment was going to be okay, and that the children were okay with the animal. And it really has been a heartwarming transformation to hear that dog has really comforted those children who get to see her and hold her and play with her every day. I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do to make a good outcome. Now, of course, it's not always possible. Children often will go to foster homes where they can't take an animal with them. But if there is that possibility, we will do everything in our power to make sure that it gets there. Now, before that dog went to the foster family, the dog was neutered. He was vaccinated, all medical cleared. And we did also do a behavior evaluation just to make sure that we weren't going to find anything that was absolutely crazy and off the wall. But there was nothing there. And the foster family was quite happy to know that everything had gone well on our end. So we want to preserve those bonds. Some cases are going to require the removal of an animal, no matter what you do. It just happens that sometimes you have to. Many of you, I'm sure, have all had an animal at some point in your life that has either passed away, had to be given away, whatever the circumstance may be. You never forget them, and the animals never forget you. However, sometimes it's the better thing for everybody involved to remove an animal. A lot of the humane organizations in our country are moving towards surrender prevention models. we are big on surrender prevention here in Bucks County. And through referrals from social service organizations or through our humane law enforcement department, our surrender prevention department and community outreach department will do anything they can to assist somebody and make sure that they are getting the help that they need in order to keep an animal in their home. Shelters are not a place for animals to go. Honestly, I mean, ours is pretty nice. Any of you who've been here knows it's clean, it's happy. We have a lot of people who work with our animals every day. They get a lot of help and love. But there's also that it's a kennel. There's the side that it's a kennel and it's not the happiest place for them to be. Being in a home and being loved is the happiest place for them to be. So in order to make sure that that happens, we have a behavior director who is a certified dog trainer. She also knows training with many other animals, including guinea pigs, which I thought was pretty cool, that can offer behavior help for anybody in our county, no matter where you got your animal from. We will offer that assistance. We also have a monetary assistance program. Now, of course, this is limited, and it really does not cover a whole lot. We've done some things where we've put down the pet deposit for somebody who was getting a new apartment. We've paid for some temporary boarding. We've given short-term food assistance. We've provided veterinary care for people who have animals that need something. Now, of course, it's not going to cover cancer treatments. It's not going to cover things like that. But hey, my cat has an upper respiratory infection or needs to go to the vet. And we have a lot of veterinarians that we work with in the area that will give us lower costs and assist people in making sure that they are getting the help that they need for their animals. And of course, we always offer pet care advice. And it can range for anything from, well, how do I set up a litter box setup? I have 4 cats. How many litter boxes do I need? To much more complicated situations. One of the biggest things that's happened in Bucks County is the relationships that have been developed. Now, of course, I'd love to take credit for that, but this started well before me. Our previous director was here for nearly 45 years. And her and my mentor, who was the previous humane officer here, had begun a lot of relationships within the county. Now, being a humane officer, I work for Bucks County SPCA. We have county in our name. However, we are not a county or government organization. We are a private, independent, nonprofit organization. So I don't have a lot of contacts on the county level without creating them myself. Bucks County has a hoarding task force, and there's so many different agencies and organizations that are involved with this. And what they've done is provide trainings, contacts. There are some limited resources for people that need assistance. But the most important thing with that is having the contacts to make sure that people are put into contact with each other. So I'll tell you a quick little story there. That's my kitty. Her name is Elvira Luna. And Elvira Luna is one of 6 cats who was left behind in a hoarded house when their owner passed away, and nobody knew that she had passed away. Police found out shortly thereafter, and they went into the house and said, "What do we do? We have 6 cats in here, and we have no idea how this is going to work." Well, fortunately, the chief of their department is part of the hoarding task force and said, "Hey, I have a contact at the SPCA. Let's reach out to them and see what type of assistance they can offer." So we were able to gather up all the cats. We were able to make contact with the next of kin who lived on the West Coast and was unable to take in the cats. And all 6 of the cats were adopted out, even the tough ones who were semi-feral. After a few months of office fostering, they became much more social and were adopted out. But that's my girl. So developing relationships prior to these situations is always the best thing. It's key in making sure that you know who to contact, or what to do when you're talking, or when you come across the situation. You know, so I kind of group these together a little bit. You have social service agencies, area agency on aging, children's services, mental health services, police co-responders, local government agencies, state agencies, also humane organizations and veterinarians. So, because I love to show off my pets and I think that they're so special. That's Max. Max was my mom's dog. But he came to us as a result of having a relationship with the park rangers in our county. Of course, I wanted to show you guys pictures of animals that came from children and youth people, but I didn't have any that I could find at that moment. But in any case, the relationship is still the same, and that's one of the most important things. Max was part of a traffic stop, and when the traffic stop was made and the owner was arrested, the owner of the vehicle was arrested, Max decided he was going to scurry out of the car and run through the woods and get lost. So one of the park rangers called, made sure that they could figure out a way to go and catch him, because he figured I have a magic cat catching or magic dog catching stick, that I would have some good ideas for him. Doesn't really work that way. So we set him up with a humane trap, and within 24 hours, Max said, "I'm really hungry and I'd like to be in that trap." He came in, was treated for all his ear infections and some other little things he had going on, and was quickly adopted out. But again, having that relationship prior to is really important. So we want to consider a lot of things, especially assistance versus prosecution. I know a lot of people, especially in the child welfare world, who ask me, you know, why do you want to prosecute versus assist? Well, I put a unicorn on there. My unicorn is that in the perfect world, we would be able to assist everybody without removing animals, without removing children, and everything would work out the way it's supposed to work out. However, we live in a cat's world, where the situation dictates what we have to do. So we're a slave to the situation, just as we're slaves to our cats. But there's a lot of things to consider. We need to consider the totality of the situation. What's going on there? How bad is it? Is there a history of this? Is there a history of animal abuse? Is there a history of child abuse? What are the possible outcomes? Now, of course, with any situation, there's a myriad of possible outcomes, but what are the most likely things to happen? What are the inherent dangers we are facing? If we leave an animal where it is, or a child where they are, is this going to continue, and is it going to cause damage to them physically or mentally? One of the hardest things is that with animals, they are considered property in many states. They are not looked at as sentient creatures, or that they have feelings and mental considerations that we should consider, but rather that they are considered property. So we want to make sure, you know, we're trying to look out for those things, but that we're sticking within what the law requires as well. And what type of response time do we need? Is this something that has to happen tomorrow? Or is this something that we can work with and maybe provide some assistance, maybe provide some training, and get people to where they need to be, and bring them up to the level of what the law requires? Now, one of the main things that we look at here, and I've used this in many cases, we look at all of this, determine what help can be offered, offer that help. When that doesn't happen, when the person doesn't take that help or doesn't put the offered assistance into practice, then we can go forward with prosecution. And I believe that's how many of the humane organizations work in our state. So again, in Pennsylvania, we want to recognize some animal cruelty, lack of food or water, lack of sanitary shelter or an appropriate shelter, lack of necessary veterinary care. And then you have your physical cruelty, where you would beat, maim, torture, abandon, or otherwise abuse. Again, it doesn't allow for the mental well-being of an animal. However, we can kind of afford into that if one of these things is happening, that the mental well-being is not going to be good as well. Now, they may not have food or water in front of them directly, but we want to kind of look it away and say, hey, how can we determine if this animal is in good body condition or not? And here is one of the things that we use, which is the body condition scoring system. There's a couple different versions. This one is the most widely used between animal shelter workers, any sort of animal care worker, veterinarians, vet techs, they're all going to be familiar with this. So it's an objective way to explain the physical weight and body condition of an animal without having to know an actual weight. I can tell you that I have a cat that weighs 14 pounds. My cat is a little on the fat side, but not too bad. 14 pounds for some cats could be emaciated. It could also be completely obese. But given my cat, I would give her a body score of a 6. So she's too heavy. I know, because my vet tells me all the time. Animals that are emaciated are going to score at a body condition score of a 1. Normal would be 4 to 5, and obese would be 8 to 9. You can use half numbers in there. You can use all different things. This is something that is very subjective. It took a lot of practice, but once you start looking at animals and body scoring them, it's a great way to be able to determine what's going on. I get a lot of calls that animals are emaciated, but really they're at about a 3, which is just pretty thin, and there could be good reason for that. If anybody would like a copy of that body condition score, let me know. I can definitely get that to you after this program. Or you can Google it. That's where it comes up easiest. There's also some stuff with some abnormal appearance. I want to give you guys some looks at things. Now, I found it amazing watching the previous presentation with looking at the children side of things, how similar they are, but it looks completely different to me because I work with animals on a daily basis. I hope that this helps you guys look and see what animals may need assistance, because it's not always recognizable. Now, if you look at the kitten on the left, the black and white kitten, he has a bit of an eye problem going on there. It's definitely not as severe as the kitten on the right, but that could be the starting of an upper respiratory infection. That tells me that there may be too many cats in that environment, or something else is going on. On the right-hand side is my buddy Jake. Jake was a dog who came to us. He was completely emaciated. His body condition score was a 0.75 when we got him. We were uncertain that he was going to survive the night when we got him. However, he did survive the night. He survived the next 12 years and had an amazing life. And he was the biggest, beefiest dog you'd want to see after that. But seeing ribs, seeing spine, and if you look, you can see on his back leg, there's a pressure sore. Those are all things that tell you something's wrong. If you look at his feet, they're a little bit stained. Tells you he's probably been standing in urine or feces or a dirty area. Other abnormalities that you can look at are skin issues. This cat here has some pink around her eyes. You want to make sure that, that could be, again, an indicator that something's going on. This poor dog has a severe skin infection. And when you walk into a home that has a dog like this, you can smell it right away. There is a very distinct smell. It's kind of a yeasty smell, but that's going to tell you that this dog has severe infection. And then, of course, a dog with some long nails. They can often ram's horn up and get stuck in their paws, in the pads of their feet, and cause infections and render the dog unable to walk. And that happens with many animals who have long nails. The cat on the left with the legs is probably a case of ringworm. Ringworm is contagious to people. So if you touch a cat that looks like that, you may want to wash your hands. and make sure that you're not spreading ringworm throughout the county, as I did one summer. The cat in the middle, there's some sort of irritation going on with the skin. Again, this is something that would require veterinary care, which is why we would probably consider it neglect. Now, with animals being abused, hit, kicked, things like that, it's often very hard to see bruising. You know, on a child, we don't have hair covering our entire bodies. You may be able to see bruising much easier, but on a dog or a cat, it's harder. This little dog was kicked severely, and the blood pooled down to the base of his belly. So that's just some severe bruising. Oftentimes, to see bruising, you have to shave an animal or pull the hair out of the way. And if you're a stranger, that can be kind of scary for them. And here's some things that we often talk about. Some of the indicators here is with housing issues. You know, do you have a messy house or do you have an unsanitary house? Two different things. You know, on the left, it looks like somebody had a wild party and forgot to clean up afterwards. On the right is an actual house where there's feces all over the floor. There were children that lived here. I mean, you can tell this by looking at the toys and the books and the small chairs and the clothes and things, but they're all mangled in with feces. That is an unsanitary house. And I'm sure many of you can smell that just by looking at the picture. But that's one of the biggest differences. I can't go in and be the clean police. So I'm sure you guys can't either. But we can go in and say, hey, this is unsanitary, and animals and children do not belong in that situation. So that comes to the end of my presentation, and I'm not sure if there's any questions.
I'm just looking through, this was just such a great presentation, Nikki, and what we're getting is just comment after comment about how valuable this has been, how informative. I want to develop relationships. So everyone is just really taking this very much to heart. I think you've really struck a nerve, and people are seeing how important this is. And just really appreciate how valuable this can be for them. I don't see any other questions. One question I had, Nikki, before we let you go, is when you're talking about, assistance versus prosecution and, your surrender prevention, do you have a sense of factors that tend to make, assistance more successful than in other cases where, no matter how much assistance you provide, nothing's going to change? Is there anything that, is kind of a common denominator for those times when it would be successful?
Absolutely. Usually when somebody's just down on their luck, hey, I lost my job. Something happened. My mom was sick and I don't have the ability to pay for vet care. I can't afford food right now. I was evicted from my home, things like that. People tend to say, I will take the assistance and we can take that and we will give it to them and they're going to use it. Now, somebody who's doing the abuse intentionally or trying to, starve their animal, and this could be they're doing it to punish their child, which I have heard. I've had cases like that. That type of person, or the mental health issue is another issue. That will be the type of person that does not take the assistance. We had a woman with a severe mental health issue, a young child, and a Great Pyrenees. And the Great Pyrenees had broken its leg, and she would take it from vet to vet and never provide care. So we said, hey, we'll pay for it. How's that work? We'll pay, I think it was $1,500 or close to $2,000. And she went to the vet and she declined care again. So again, we notified children and youth in that situation, which I think they were already working on. Of course, we don't get a lot of information back usually, so I have to assume sometimes. And the dog ended up getting the surgery that it needed, and we did have to remove the animal from the situation. But usually it's a mental health or it's an intentional neglect or abuse situation that does not take assistance. And that just makes for a great court case when I go in front of a judge.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I can turn this back over to Dana.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And Nikki, that was so educational between you and Claire, really giving us information. I think you both are online, that the collaboration is so absolutely important. I know we have worked together on it to help victims. It's really important. So I want to give a shout out to both of our panelists, Claire Coughlin, coordinator of the Animals and Interpersonal Violence Program and Safe Havens for Pets project at the Animal Welfare Institute. And of course, Nikki Thompson, Chief Humane Police Officer with Bucks County, SPCA, for sharing these amazing experiences and their knowledge about the link between the animal and child abuse. As we know, educating professionals about this effect of animal abuse on children, as well as about reporting these abuses, is crucial if we want to try to break the cycle of violence. And only through the collaboration of these agencies can we accomplish this goal effectively. We want to thank, the Keystone Links, Richard K. Mellon Foundation, along with Crisis Center North for hosting this webinar. Since 1978, Crisis Center North has existed as a domestic violence education, prevention, counseling, and resource center, serving over 100,000 total survivors. And we have a Pause for Empowerment program at Crisis Center North, which is partially funded through the DOJ Office for Victims of Crime, Emergency, and Transitional Pet Shelter and Housing Assistance Grants, a mouthful. This grant, though, has expanded our services, which I'm going to discuss in depth very quickly, for emergency shelter and housing options for victims and pets, supportive stipends, and training. And I think it's really important to talk about these things because, there's a bond between these, there's a bond with the victims and their pets. And so what this does is that we want to try to keep them together because it's a barrier to leaving those relationships. And as we have heard, the children are used with the pets as a way of control by the abusers. And so the people are afraid to leave their pets. And so they stay a lot of times for that purpose. So I'm just going to show you real quickly some quick screen shaving. Hold on. Okay. So at our center, we have helped 234 pets this year: cats, dogs, horses, ferrets, many others. And we want to make sure that we give this information to all of you guys because you guys can also have programs that would work like this. We do not have a shelter here at Crisis Center North. However, we have different kinds of services to work with collaboration with other organizations. We have emergency hotel housing for people and their pets when they need to get out of the situation quickly and they don't want to leave their pet because that pet could be killed or abused or hurt. And so they want to make sure that they can take their pet with them somewhere in those emergency situations. We also have emergency boarding, which are things also like that Nikki had talked about that she does through her organization, because if they are being abused and the people want to leave, they can get the animal out and then get the animal when they feel that it's safe for themselves, or else while they're looking for shelter, we also try to get them somewhere where perhaps they can't take their pet with them. We help the families with pet tangible assistance leaving because, as we know, financial abuse often occurs in the family violence. And so they don't have the money to take care of these pets. And these pets are part of their family. They think of these pets as their family, and also so essential for the children for their healing. We help them with their veterinary care costs so that the animals are able to move with the family, as well as if there are any abuse costs. We help them, families who need first month's rent, security deposits, security cameras, things like that, to exit the home or stay in the home safely away from the abuser. We have a few pet-friendly housings that we help support with rental assistance. And we also have transportation to necessary destinations. Our housing program is absolutely amazing, and we hope to expand it more. It is case management to teach these people, empower these people to be able to know that they can do this themselves away from their abuser. There are funds to help them stay in the home. There's counseling, we have pet services, and we really, really work for successful independence from abuse and violence. We also have a very interesting part that I have not seen many places, is that we help families that have large animals. There are multiple times that an abuser of a farm will threaten the animals, say that they're going to kill the animals, that they won't provide electricity. It is very, very difficult for abusers and their children, or for victims and their children, to leave a farm and leave all of these animals not knowing if they are going to be cared for and who's going to. So we have different assistance for their veterinary funds, transportation of the animals, and boarding costs also. This is my information if you do need that. And we really, really want to thank the participants the people on the panelists who have been so amazing in giving us all this information to identify the abuse between the animal and the children. But most importantly, we want to thank you, the participants, for attending this webinar, presenting your questions and comments, and most importantly, for working in all of our communities to stop the violence in the family, which includes the humans and the animals both.
And I think that concludes our webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.